Time now for the Sunday paper review. We're delighted to be joined by Irish independent rugby writer Rory O'Connor and the sports writer with the 42, Gavin Casey. Gavin is in studio with me. You're back in here at the OTB studio. Are you keeping well?
I'm very well, John. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, enjoyed yesterday, I have to say. Enjoyed fans back in the stadium, watching it and experiencing it. And from afar, I'd love to be there and just can't wait for the rest of the tournament, to be honest. This is the most exciting Six Nations I remember in quite a while. Maybe it's because we have no empty stadiums anymore, but I'm really buzzed about it.
I have to say, I covered the 20s game on Friday night down in Cork, and I don't usually actually write about rugby or cover it live. We do a podcast and things, but it had been 5 years since a colleague of mine, Murray Kinsella, took a bit of a hiatus, went down to New Zealand for a while, since I'd actually reported on a game from a ground. And even the sense of anticipation on the way into Musgrave Park, there was a real sort of curtain raiser feel to it, and that buzz of just hearing people talking about young players as it was that night. It whet the appetite pretty nicely, and then the main course yesterday lived up to the billing, didn't it?
We're ready for the Roaring 20s, Rory O'Connor, I think, and you were there, I expect, yesterday. Do you have the lagging jacket today? Because I'd say up at the top of those stands, and that day was pretty tricky.
It wasn't too bad up in the stands. Yeah, it was much worse down at pitch level, I think. Talking, dialing into press conferences with Johnny Sexton and Andy Farrell, they definitely talked about how tricky the kicking was, and the rain whipped in during the end of that first half, started the second half. It was a pretty miserable day around the place afterwards as well. There was no taxis to be had anywhere near the stadium, so a lot of people were trudging home in the rain, but they didn't mind too much, I don't think, because it was just lovely to be back. I mean, we were there in a full Aviva in November for the New Zealand game, and that really felt like a real coming out party again, and obviously we had the setback around Christmas, but it was just lovely to be in a Six Nations match. Especially for those of us, I think, who had been in the empty stadiums. It was, you didn't want to be complaining about it when you were there and no one else could get in, but it was really, really grim in those big empty concrete stadiums, and you could hear the players echoing around. It's so much better to have fans in there, even though they were in the Mexican wave, but that maybe was an indicative of how the day went and how comfortable Ireland had it, and like from an Irish rugby point of view, it does look like we're in for a bit of a roaring 20s for the next couple of years anyway, because this team, and this is reflected in the coverage across the papers today, is looking more and more like the real deal. And Andy Farrell looks like he's taken what Joe Schmidt built and he's bringing it on to another level, and that's incredibly exciting for all those people who were there yesterday, apart from the poor old Welsh people who had to kind of listen to us all gloat for the rest of the day.
Lovely moment at Anfield, just to interject there, folks. Harvey Elliott has lashed in the ball to make it 3-0 for Liverpool against Cardiff after coming back from that serious injury against Leeds. It's just great to see him scoring, lads. It's just great. We'll go through the back pages here now and detail what we have. Front page of the Sunday Times sports section. Quick out of the blocks, flying start for Ireland with the 29-7 win over Wales. Next up, France. Farrell relishing key France showdown. And also Rooney, I drank to block pain and anger, Jonathan Norcroft writing. Wayne Rooney is admitted to locking himself away and binging on alcohol to escape the pressures of football. In an interview before the release of a documentary, Rooney on Amazon Prime Video on Friday, England's goal scorer also revealed that he had therapy to overcome his anger issues, the record goal scorer. I'll add here, Rooney admits in that documentary called Rooney, he was always angry and aggressive when growing up. That was obvious when I came into football. You're always taught to fight for what you want when you're growing up and take what you want. You never got given anything. He then took his anger onto the pitch, admitting in the documentary that he changed to longer studs for a game at Stamford Bridge in 2006 because Chelsea were about to win the title, and that frustration made him want to hurt someone. So we'll talk about that in further detail with Gavin and Rory throughout the 90 minutes here between now and 3. The Irish... or Sunday rather, Independent. Super Ireland's grand ambition, Wales a slump to 4-try defeat. A picture of Andrew Conway touching the ball down there. And also, Farrell takes his side to Paris looking for a perfect 10 after his ruthless team put Wales to the sword. That is the Sunday Independent front page. And Magical Maguire makes history. Brilliant Leona secures first win on the LPGA Tour. That is the Sunday Independent. The back of the Sunday World. Desi, ignore the critics. So these players need care and nurturing, insists Dublin manager, and sex is on fire. Johnny rolls back the years to inspire Ireland as Wales are brushed aside. And John Aldridge, Roy must lose his keen edge if he's to be a top manager, as we expect Roy Keane to return to the hot seat at Sunderland. Back of the Irish Daily Mail, flying start. Ireland maintain a winning momentum with the merciless forthright thrashing of Wales, writes Rory Keane at the back of the Sunday Mail. And Wayne Rooney, I'd lock myself away and drink for days to try and forget the rage and the pain. And Maguire makes history with their first tour win. The back of the Sun on Sunday. Lows of Tralee, Desi were never going to beat them. And also Mackin pleased Ireland off to a flyer as Hanshin shines in the Six Nations opener. Neil O'Riordan writing that there. Magnificence. Leona Maguire hailed reaching the end of a long road after ceding victory at the Drive-On Championship on the LPGA Tour last night. You got to be kidding. Kidderminster 1, West Ham 2, the review of the FA Cup fourth round ties. And also the Sunday Mirror, the back page of that. Revolt. Rangnick's treatment of Lingard has left senior United stars fuming. Ronaldo eyes up PSG escape route. So a lot of speculation in the back of the Sunday Mirror today. Going far. Andy and Irish set their sights on Paris after the opening day cruise. And Maguire's champion in the US Tour. That fantastic story of Leona Maguire winning the LPGA Tour event there in Florida yesterday in the 54-hole event as Cardiff score to make it 3-1 to Liverpool against Cardiff. 80 minutes gone at Anfield. And the Observer, just to give a different flavour here, Sexton's Irish lay down title marker in thrashing of injury hit Wales. And Calcutta Crunch. Scotland capitalised on Cowan Dickey's moment of madness to send Murrayfield into raptures after a dramatic finish. And also Jonathan Wilson at the back page of The Observer. Carlos Queiroz and his histrionic Egypt have the smart start with Senegal, previewing the Africa Cup of Nations final between Senegal and Egypt at 7 o'clock this evening. Where are we going to start, Rory? Presumably, obviously, we'll probably get through the next 40 minutes on Ireland, Wales and Scotland, England. Where is the best riding so far today on what we saw yesterday at the Aviva?
Yeah, there's some good stuff. I guess the earlier kick-off to 2:15 allows time for a little bit more consideration. My deadline for my match report was 6:30, so it gives you a bit of time to sit down after the game and have a bit of a more of a think about it rather than run of play and kind of doing it during the match. I enjoyed David Walsh's approach to it. David Walsh comes in from he's obviously an Irish journalist working in England who's come back to cover the game and just brings in he meets a friend, Jim Clancy from Glenfarne and North Leitrim, and kind of wraps that into the two Connacht players combining for the first try of the game. For more kind of an analytical stuff, you're kind of looking at the Sunday Indo and between Brendan Fanning, Bernard Jackman and Rory Best, they're quite well covered. But it's almost unremittingly positive. It's everyone, I think, is on board with what, like, if you think back to this time a year ago when Ireland came out of Cardiff having lost their first game, with that red card, and then a week later losing to France at home and in a much poorer performance. And then you look at, fast forward 12 months, you look at the kind of coverage now. Andy Farrell has gone from being, getting serious pressure in the Sunday papers on a weekly basis to now being, just bring praise from the rooftops for the style of play, for the mindset, for the decision to pick Mac Hansen, out of seemingly nowhere. And it's I'm looking at kind of Brendan Fanning here, who's kind of talking about the physicality that the Irish team brought to the table, and how the one thing that kind of makes people most uncomfortable about rugby is the most important thing to winning it. And what Ireland bring now, that they switched Andrew Porter to the loose outside of the scrum, and they have a pack full of ball carriers and footballers. They're just really unpredictable and hard to defend. It's an incredible mix that he's been able to build over the course of the 2 years that he's been in charge, and it just makes them real contenders. And it's been a while since we've had this much kind of praise for the Irish rugby team. You're looking at 2018 really, since you would have opened a Sunday paper and seen universal praise for what Ireland are doing, and it's an achievement from Andy Farrell to have done that, and it makes what they can, like, there's real potential in what they can achieve this spring. No one's really throwing ahead. It's a lot of it is focused on the game. I expect tomorrow's papers will be more like starting to look at Paris, and they've won 9 in a row. I think 8 of those games were in Dublin. So now the next step is to go on and do that. But I think if Ireland can get a result there next week, you'll see people talking slams and really getting on board with what this team can achieve in this window.
Brendan Fanning quotes here, efficiently the last play had featured Mac Hansen. Rarely has an Ireland debutant found his feet in Test rugby so fast. He comes across as the type of fella who could fall out of a plane and not worry about the landing.
Brendan's piece is actually very entertaining, and he does a good job of encapsulating the game without necessarily writing directly about the game so much. And I think it's interesting as well that there's a bit of a dichotomy between, say, how Brendan saw the game and how Bernard Jackman saw the game a couple of pages later in the Sindo as well. Because, as Rory alluded to, Brendan is speaking about the physicality that Ireland brought to proceedings, and even that to me is fascinating compared to, like, it's a fascinating departure from the narrative around this Irish team and around Irish rugby as recently as 2019, when we were monstered in Lansdowne Road by England, when we went to Cardiff, got a thumping, and the perception was that we couldn't live physically with bigger teams. And I think that was also the reality. Now things have changed, and as much as Ireland do bring now a really ferocious physicality to proceedings, Bernard writes in his piece that he watched the match with former Ireland blindside Stephen Ferris, a man that loved collisions and was very good at winning them. Near the end of the game, he remarked that the match hadn't appeared to be overly physical. Now, in fairness, I don't know that Ferris has seen a game since he retired that he's considered physical. You know, I think he played in what he sees as a kind of a golden age of physicality, and that was largely because of himself on the pitch as well. But Birch adds that while there were some big impacts, I agreed with him, and the reason for that wasn't that Wales weren't up for the physical battle, but that Ireland have become really good at avoiding them when they can. And Jackman does a really good job, generally speaking, of breaking down games and sort of putting into accessible terms how a team is playing and how they're actually creating space, how they're going about their business. And within the same piece, he says, what I loved about Ireland's attack yesterday was the variety in where we attacked. And we had a lovely balance of front door and back door attacking options, which pulled the Welsh defence apart on countless occasions. And I just love this little synopsis from Jackman. He says, once you get cracks in their defensive lines up the middle, then the defence shortens in its width and you throw the types of pass over the top that saw Bundy Aki and Andrew Conway score tries yesterday. So pretty much in a paragraph, I think he summed up what made Ireland's performance so effective and explains why the coverage of them today is so positive.
Neil Francis, I thought, had a good column as well, Rory, which the few things in it were interesting. It seems obvious that Ireland's pack is the best in the championship, and that in order to beat Ireland, their opponents will have to subdue their pack. And also, Conor Murray's efforts seem to be of a completely different pace and rhythm to what Gibson Park had brought earlier on. Yes, clearing the benches does nothing for continuity, but it just seemed very noticeable to me that Gibson Park is a fixture of this team on that form.
Yeah, it's definitely, like the pace with which Ireland plays suits Gibson Park, and Gibson Park suits the pace with which Ireland play. And it was noticeable when Conor Murray came on, as Neil Francis points out in his piece, that he was a bit slower than Gibson Park in terms of his delivery, and it's unfortunate now for Murray that when he comes onto the pitch, he's doing so when the changes have been made and when the game is effectively over, and he's trying to impress. He made one really good break, but he also delivered a poor pass that led to the Welsh try. So these are picking Gibson Park ahead of Conor Murray in November 2020. It wasn't even a big story at the time. It was kind of seen as an experimental thing, but Farrell laid the groundwork for where he is now. He was the one who has moved kind of Murray on, and the challenge is now there. That was the first game, the first Six Nations opener since 2010 that Conor Murray didn't start it out at scrum half for Ireland. So that's a marker of how important that this player was to this team. He's synonymous with this team. I mean, if you look at the captain's run picture, Johnny Sexton is beside the president, and you've got O'Mahony and Murray are the closest players to him. Both men are on the bench now. They're senior players. They're still centrally contracted senior players within the setup. I think Keane Healy's in around there as well, but they're on the bench and they're still playing a role, but they're no longer the made men that they were in terms of they used to come in on a Monday knowing they were going to be in the team on Saturday. Now they pretty much know they're going to be on the bench, and like Gibson Park wasn't perfect yesterday by any means, but he didn't play his way out of the team. I still fully expect him to start in Paris next week when he's going away from home and going up against Anton Dupont. But it's just a mark of Farrell's been quite, he hasn't played a political game with his selection. He hasn't been afraid to jettison a 90 cap fan favourite for a project player who's come in from New Zealand and wasn't even starting with Leinster. He's not afraid to pick 12 Leinster players in the team and cop some flack if it goes wrong. He's been quite brave, and those other coaches before him have been a little bit more political in the way they've gone about things because they're afraid of the backlash if things go wrong. Farrell has been his own man throughout, and Neil Francis would have been, when he was writing for the Sunday Indo, would have been very critical last year of Andy Farrell and the direction the team was travelling, and now He's writing about them changing from a caterpillar to a butterfly, from banjo to pianissimo. That they're now unrecognisable, and he is saying like that the next question is, can they do it against the big sides? Can they do it away from home? That's the next challenge for them. But the evidence is there that they're going to be a very hard team to beat for anyone on any venue over the course of the next couple of weeks.
And as Rory knows from covering rugby, and as any sports journalist will probably tell you from feedback online especially, you can be critical of a team who are, as you see it, underperforming, and then when that team bucks up their ideas to an extent and starts to perform better, when you point that out, you can be labelled a hypocrite almost, or like, well, like you were giving out about them last year, or you were giving out about them last week. But like,
people would make careers on changing their mind.
But that's it. But also like changing, like there are kind of two realities here. Like Ireland a couple of years ago, well, as recently as last year at the start of the Six Nations, didn't look like a good side, and Andy Farrell was under pressure, probably unfairly as he and his coaching staff saw it, but to anybody on the outside it almost made sense that he was. They weren't playing to even par, and they probably weren't getting the best out of their very good players, but the reality is now that they are. And like one thing that I would say is a great testament to Farrell is not only the patience that he showed and sort of lack of panic that he showed when he was under the cosh a little bit, but like there was a lot of foresight here in what they were trying to do. Now, Johnny Sexton used to be at pains to point out to Claire McNamara in a post-match interview or anytime he did a press conference that they were on the right track, and that we would eventually see the results of the work that was being put in behind the scenes at Carlton House, elsewhere. I didn't really believe him, but he was right, and so was Farrell. Like, as Rory says, to drop Conor Murray at the time, it wasn't a massive story, I think, mostly because of Conor Murray's form at that time, which has since picked up for Munster, to my mind. But it was a statement of intent in a way, and you see now how integral Gibson Park is to the attack that Bernard Jackman, that Rory Best, that Brendan Fanning are talking about, and the tempo at which Ireland played, which Wales could not live with yesterday. And it feels like there was a kind of a grand plan in place all along. Even if there wasn't, they have found one, I think.
Rory, have you seen anything else? This, like, as you say at the very top of the piece here, there's nothing negative. Like, it's very much, this is all great. And when I was highlighting what I kind of read from the reviews of yesterday, it's almost like a job done, move on.
It's boring, isn't it?
Yeah, it is boring.
It's very hard to be critical of a team who go out in their first game of the season and absolutely marmalise the champions. They've derailed Welsh Rugby. I was reading Steve James in the Sunday Times. I don't think it's actually, I think it's maybe an online piece that's gone up in the last couple of hours, but he's writing it from a Welsh point of view, and I think Bernard Jackman touches on it just towards the end of his piece. And obviously Bernard, Birch has worked in Wales and is very close to kind of what's going on there, and wrote about it really well last week and has spoken about it during the week as well. The Welsh team has been we've been waiting. And it happens every couple of years. Ireland it's not the first time Ireland have beaten Wales well in an early Six Nations game in Dublin. They don't like coming to Dublin that much. This game often goes the way of the home team. But just reading Birch here, it's like this Welsh team's success has defied logic. When you combine the region's lack of success with the lack of quality of their under-20s, as evidenced on Friday night in Cork, over the last few seasons, there may be trouble ahead in Welsh Rugby. The lack of investment in the professional game might finally be coming home to roost. And, Ireland are reaping the reward for having 4 fairly highly functioning provinces. Like, they all have their own little issues here and there over the course of a season, and we could have a whole show about Munster and the direction they're taking. Connacht, are having their own issues at the moment in terms of form, and yet they're able to deliver. Mac Hansen, their clever recruitment has provided Ireland with a new left winger. Leinster's recruitment has provided Ireland with the previous guy who's now out injured. So I would be critical of the RFU and certain things that they do, particularly on the women's side of the house. I don't think they're a perfect organisation by any manner of means, but they're doing an awful lot right, and they're laying the foundation work for that performance that came out there yesterday. And they'll be, I'm sure they're opening their papers today quite happy with the positive coverage that they're getting across the board, and like it's earned. I mean, that was a really, really good performance yesterday, so it's hard to be overly critical of it. I think there is a knowledge that there's still room for this team to improve, and there's still bigger tests to come, because I think most people across, Jackman says it, a couple of people say it across the way, Wales were, they may be the champions, but they were very poor, and David Walsh makes the point. Ireland were 9-1 on, I think, yesterday. They were 14 points favourites. So, like, it wasn't an unexpected result. It was they did their job, but they did it so well, and they did it with such a panache and style and energy that they have the crowd on board. It's not. There's a bit of box kicking going on, but it's not rugby by numbers. It's very, very nice to watch, and that buys them so much credit. Even if they go to Paris and lose, if they do it playing the way they played yesterday, they won't get as much criticism as they did when they were, when they were playing badly. Like the approach is helping them as well, so it's buying them a lot of goodwill.
If I could pick one thing to be a little bit more cautionary about, and it's tiny, really. It's probably that a couple of the chances they did have yesterday, Rory, they should have taken more of them, I guess, in the sense that, like, there's every chance this tournament won't result in a country winning a Grand Slam, and against a Wales, like, I don't know. I was watching the game and I'm wondering to myself, are Wales actually shocking here, or are Ireland very good, right? And I think a lot of people were asking the same question, probably even after about an hour of the game. Rory Best makes that point in his piece as well. Afterwards, I kind of felt as though I don't think the way Wales defended, I don't actually think, apart from France, any other country is going to score 4 tries against them and get a bonus point. On the other hand, though, like, if there is no Grand Slam and if it comes down to points difference or whatever, that Basham interception at the end and a couple of Ireland's missed opportunities make them back to haunt us. But I don't know. I'm probably being overly critical when it's unnecessary to be. I suppose we've just been haunted by points difference before, and given how poor Wales were, maybe we could have capitalised a little bit more on our dominance.
I think you're right. I think if you go back to the New Zealand game, Ireland missed loads of chances. Like at one stage during the New Zealand game, it looked like Ireland might go and actually do something. Beating them from an Irish point of view is always special. But there's an argument to be made that Ireland should have beaten them by an awful lot more that day. The scoreline didn't reflect their dominance, and 29-7 doesn't reflect the story of yesterday's game either. And maybe this is going to, when they go to Paris and London, or when Scotland come to town, because Scotland look like a good team now as well, they maybe won't have as many chances, so they can't afford to be as profligate. At the moment, they're creating so many chances that they can take 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 and still win the game quite comfortably. That's another, and that's what Sexton and Farrell in their post-match stuff, after New Zealand and after yesterday, are being quite consistent in saying, look, we're nowhere near where we want to be. We're not as good as we can be, and we are. When we look at the tape, we're seeing a lot to improve on, and it's not just press conference talk. You're right, Gavin. Like there is a lot out there that they're leaving behind, but they're creating so much that it almost doesn't matter at the moment, particularly at home against teams that can't cope with their physicality and their pace and the angles of running that might not be the most physical game as Bernard and Stephen Ferris were saying, but that's because of the variation Ireland have, because Wales just don't know which Irish players getting the ball, so they can't set in the fence and all that stuff that Bernard Jackman talked about. So yeah, I think there's definitely, like, they can be more ruthless and more clinical and even better. And you're right, at the end of the tournament they may look back on the scoreline as not being good enough, but it's the first game, and it was
a
really
bonus point. They got the bonus point.
Yeah, they got the bonus point. So that's refining the small things that need to get better on. But it's a really good place to be as they look ahead.
Yeah.
Some text here. Conor Murray has been brought on to control things, slow things down, etc. It's obvious it's a different job. His job is not to come on to replace Jameson Gibson Park, even though obviously he does as a number 9.
Well, that's fine if you're ahead, but if you're chasing a game, he's got to come in and do, he's got to try and kind of keep that game plan going. So it's a perfect bench for when we're trying to close out a game. You'd wonder. I mean, you've got Henderson and Henshaw probably coming back next week, so that adds a bit of impact as well. So, but Murray wants to start. He doesn't want to be number 21. He wants number 9. So
he was a Lions captain not too long ago, only for a brief period of time. But
could I just say on that, I find it very interesting what Farrell is doing with his bench, in the sense that I think that the person who texts in, his name escapes me there, sorry, is spot on in the sense that is what Murray is being brought on to do. I think it's interesting, like Peter O'Mahony as an impact sub has almost reinvented the concept a little bit, or at least Farrell has through O'Mahony, in the sense that we're so used to a back row coming on to grind down a tired defence and take ball to them, whereas O'Mahony is just getting over the ball and winning penalties when the opposition pack is pretty tired, and he's done that to very high success both against New Zealand and against Wales. And also I think Farrell has put an emphasis on publicly put an emphasis on how Ireland start fast and need to start fast, and I think their entire game plan is about building an early lead and not necessarily hanging on to it, but managing it. And Rory is dead right to point out that there will eventually come a point when that won't be the case, and that'll be the test.
We're speaking to Gavin Casey and Rory O'Connor on the Sunday pay-per-view. Plenty more to get through. Wayne Rooney, Roy Keane, Dublin Kerry, and more on the rugby after the news between 2 and 3. Don't go away. And you're welcome back to Off the Ball here on News Talk. John Duggan sitting in for Joe Malloy until 7. We're continuing the Sunday pay-per-view with Irish independent rugby writer Rory O'Connor and the sports writer with the 42, Gavin Casey, as well as listening on News Talk. You can watch us on the live streams for Periscope and Twitter at Off the Ball, YouTube, Facebook, and on the OTB Sports app for iOS and Android. Search OTB Sports in your app store to download it if you haven't already. Kind of spoken a bit about Ireland, Wales, and the comfortable win for Ireland yesterday, 29-7 at the Six Nations at Lansdowne Road. Rory, Scotland, England, I suppose Eddie Jones, the subject of questioning in the papers. Townsend's men are in it to win it, and it could be a Dublin decider, writing Ian McGeechan from the Telegraph, and also reflections in the Sunday Independent as well.
Sorry, John, I lost you for a bit there, but I got the thrust of it. But yeah, no, I watched. I won't be able to give much insight into the game because I watched. Didn't see the first half because it was on press conferences, and the second half I watched in a very crowded Lansdowne Rugby Club where it was heartening. You know, so some things even post COVID haven't changed. The bar heartily welcomed Scotland's win at the full time whistle. I mean, it was dramatic. If nothing else, it was to go down to the wire in the way that it did was great. But you got to love the Scots. Like Ian McGeechan is obviously a former Scottish coach at international, is delighted with the win, and kind of warns that we can't get carried away. We can't get too far ahead of ourselves. And the next paragraph is starting talking about winning the Six Nations title and potentially a Grand Slam. So the Scots are getting excited, much in the same. I'm sure the Scottish, if we had the Scottish editions in front of us, we'd have pretty similar positivity to what we're getting in Ireland at the moment. And it's so long since they won this tournament. When they open up against, with a win over England, even a weakened and slightly directionless England at the moment, you've got to say it gives them reason to believe that they this could be their year, just as Ireland and you'd presume France will be feeling at the end of this weekend. So I think that the criticism of England is really interesting. I didn't really get any of the optimism for them coming into the tournament. Their win over South Africa in November was quite fortuitous, and it seemed to be the basis that most people had for believing in them. And I think Stephen Jones fairly cuts through a lot of the bluster in his piece. He talks about them being a kind of a where do he says the Calcutta Cup stays in Scotland. Where do England stay at the moment? They're in danger of more mid-table mediocrity. It's harsh to criticise a team that's lost its key players, but it could easily be that the most important game for English rugby this weekend is the one where Manu Tuilagi is meant to start his comeback for Sale Sharks away at Harlequins. And this is the thing, Eddie Jones has tried to reinvent his side and revolutionise what they're doing, but it looks like a lot of the players he's either moved on from or can't pick are the most important players, and he'll end up going back to them. I mean, Marcus Smith was included from the start yesterday, but he wasn't still on the pitch at the end when they possibly needed him. Their last play was quite directionless, and they ran out of ideas in some ways. And that for a team that finished 5th last year, that probably have the best paid coach in the world, certainly the most opinionated coach in the world. It's not a good result. It's not a good start, and they don't look to be, for all that they have very good players and vast resources and a very good coach when he wants to be. They don't look like they're in a particularly brilliant place at the moment.
Gavin?
They kind of have a bit of a hoodoo over England now over the last 5 years, and it really was a rearguard action yesterday at Murrayfield. England had most of the territory. England looked like the more threatening side out wide. They were probably earning the right to go out wide a little bit through their pack, and Scotland just defended beaverishly, and I'm shocked to see how they were able to turn the game around from a 7-point deficit in the second half against an Eddie Jones England side, or indeed any England side. I was shocked to see the Scotland captain give a team talk on the pitch at half time very performatively, and for the Scotland team to still win. These are things that used to sort of coincide with Scotland blowing leads and blowing games. So I wouldn't go as far as to say I'm concerned about them or I'm any more concerned about Scotland rather than I would be about, say, a France or an England still as a potential championship threat. But eventually you would imagine they are going to click and win 4 games, and they took one step closer to it yesterday.
It was a sad week for the game, I felt, with the passing of Tom Kieran, and it's great to see. Obviously that's been paid tribute to today with Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times Rory, it's like I kind of feel that if it wasn't such a busy week, like you'd have 2-page spreads and you'd have such probably a bigger tribute to a man who did so much for the game. Like when you're thinking about like Tom Kieran, like 54 caps, Lions captain, coached Munster beat the All Blacks in 1978, coached Ireland to win the first Triple Crown in 33 years, was a huge administrative force for Irish rugby and European rugby, like a legacy that is just absolutely incredible, Rory.
Yeah, and it's probably, it faded into the realms of history a little bit in the last kind of decade, and his name doesn't come up an awful lot when you're talking about these things. And then, his death occurs, and Dave Kelly, my colleague, produced an interview that he did with him in 2008, and like when you go through it and you hear him speak about his own experiences, what a fascinating life in rugby, and you've listed out some of them there, John, and I think his legacy is absolutely essential to the success that we talked about earlier of Irish rugby. I mean, the decisions that he was one of the few in the RFU to be at the vanguard of professionalism and to try and drive Irish rugby into the new era. And it took us a while, and we had a lot of lean years in between, but when you think of how successful the Heineken Cup has been, he was at the forefront of creating that, and an advocate for it. He was the one who delivered the news. It's in Peter O'Reilly's piece. He delivered the news to the RFU that they were being thrown out of the Five Nations back in, I think it was 1998, because of they were going on pay TV, and these the very, like, this tournament that we all that attracts so many eyeballs every year was at the brink of being dismantled like 22 years ago, and he was one of the people who kept it all going. It's an incredible legacy to leave. It's very sad that he has died this week, but the writing around him, Tony Ward had a really good piece in our paper during the week, has brought his name back into the public realm, and there was a very well observed minute silence in the stadium yesterday, and rightly so. He leaves an incredible legacy, and contributed so much to the game in this country, and to what we saw yesterday in terms of the kind of the events, the team, the fact that Ireland are so strong right now. A large part of that is down to the legacy that he leaves.
His family legacy as well, John, is pretty impressive. Just
in Cork.
In Cork, yeah. But I mean, he's an uncle of Michael Kieran, who went on to win a Triple Crown with Ireland, famously scored that drop goal against England. Michael's son, Paul Kieran, captain Munster underage, was an Ireland under-20 international. He's still playing AIL ball. And actually, I just saw yesterday that Paul's cousin, another of Tom's grandnephews, Billy Kieran, is playing for UCC. He's played a few games in Division 1A this season, but literally 5 minutes after a moment's silence for Tom at a UCC under-20s game yesterday, Billy scored a try and racked up a load of points. So I think the Kieran name will roll on throughout rugby circles in Cork and beyond. Very
good. Gavin is where we go to next, and Leona Maguire and Dermot Gilleece. Just, I suppose, it was late last night, so you're not going to get an analysis piece probably until next week, but just the information, I suppose, from Dermot Gilleece about Leona Maguire and her victory in the LPGA tournament there in Florida, which was the Drive On Championship. So I'm just bringing it up here. Magical Maguire secures historic first win on tour, so it's been a bit surreal, said Leona, who is projected to jump to number 3 in the race to the CME Globe after picking up $225,000 to take her career earnings to $1.3 million. It's huge for Irish golf, she said. There was never an Irish player on the tour, let alone a winner. Hopefully there are a lot more people at home watching tonight with big smiles on their faces, and little girls watching, hoping that they can hold a putt like that. So Dermot Gilleece writing about Leona Maguire, just a fantastic feel-good story, Gavin, and I think that we don't know what the ceiling. I think she's going to be a major champion, and I'd say in the next couple of years. Yeah, so she finished 6th in the Evian Championship, wasn't it, last year? And like the trajectory even then, like, to be honest, her career trajectory has always indicated that it was going to go this way and keep going upwards, even since we probably first, or at least I first started hearing about her at Duke University. I had a couple of friends who were doing masters or God knows what in law down there, and Irish people on that campus and around the place were raving about this young golfer, as she was and still is, from Gavin. And I think what she's been able to do since turning professional in 2018, her heroics at the Solheim Cup, her consistency now as well, has been genuinely phenomenal. I think it's what I loved about it actually was, like, last year we celebrated for the right reasons almost a rise of women's sport, or like an increased
level of success, an increased level of exposure, thanks to hard work from so many people, especially female athletes themselves. And like, it just feels like a continuation of that now. And to have her in contention as well with Seamus Power over the weekend, where Seamus and herself, I saw a clip spliced together of them where they were speaking about each other and how they actually monitor each other's progress and so on. And Seamus was making the same points that we are, I suppose, that this isn't a surprise and that long may it continue.
177th in the world rankings at the end of 2020, Rory. And sometimes players arrive in different sports. I think Brian O'Driscoll's arrival was the hat-trick in Paris. Leona's arrival is the Solheim Cup, 4.5 points out of 5 as a rookie. And now she wins the tournament. I think it's great for her. She's got it out of the way so the pressure doesn't build for the rest of the year. Her privileges are sewn up. She got money in the bank now. She's playing in the States. She got Dermot Byrne on the bag. And in major company, having been the amateur world number 1 for 135 weeks, you have to think that she's going to be a big contender in the years to come as somebody in her mid-20s.
Yeah, you would, and it's a testament. I think, like, I remember herself and her sister being at, awards dinners, nominated for Young Sports Star of the Year every year for a couple of years, and being heralded as the next big thing, a couple of years ago now. But it's taken her, she's had to do it the hard way. She's kind of built herself up to this level, and it's a real testament to the patience and diligence that she has, that she's able to get to the level that she's at. And it's great to have it. Anytime we have an Irish sports person competing at the elite level consistently, I mean, it's just going to build interest in her sport. It's going to draw eyes. I wasn't watching myself last night, but you could tell from certainly my social media feed that people were behind her, that they were that they were getting interested, getting involved. That should have a good knock-on effect for her own ability to earn and to kind of get sponsorships on board, and then ultimately for women's golf that will get more people playing the game. So sports need people like Leona Maguire to be successful to drive on with it. But the achievement is her own. Other people, she'll obviously reap rewards from it. Other people will too. But it's very impressive, the fact that she's stayed the course, that she's built herself into this force, and this you would think would give her confidence to go on and to the next level, as you say.
Kerry in Dublin, Gavin, was interesting last night. A 7-point win for Kerry down in Tralee, but the game was pretty much wrapped up by half time. Joe Brodie, Colm O'Rourke, they're all weighing in. Michael Foley, a bit more of a straight match report in the Sunday Times. Dublin are a hot topic for people now, because when you're a 6-time All-Ireland winner in a row, you've never done that before in the history of Gaelic sport. Any kind of downfall or any kind of coming back to the pack is going to be poured upon.
Yeah, it's funny, like the death knell is being sounded, and probably has been even since Armagh last week. But at the start of Colm O'Rourke's piece, I was kind of a little bit alarmed reading it. He says, a few things struck me just after one round of league football. The first one is that the Dubs are finished. They'll probably be relegated and doomed to years in the desert. In fact, I might not even mention splitting Dublin again. That's when I realised he was, of course, joking. But it feels as though maybe not to that extreme necessarily, that this is kind of what people are feeling about Dublin. Like, to speak about Kerry first of all, because I think we probably will get in, the three of us, into where Dublin go from here, or what exactly they're trying to do at the moment. Like, Kerry won the game, they won it very impressively. I thought it was actually a little bit of a missed opportunity for Kerry. I know that'll sound weird, in the sense that, albeit into a gale in the second half, they had a chance to really put their foot on Dublin's throats. And if Dublin are in crisis, then this was a chance for Kerry to plunge them even further into crisis, I would have thought, by giving them a real hammering. And I think it would have been in Kerry's interest, absolutely, for Dublin to feel a little bit worse about themselves than they probably do today. So just, I mean, to speak about Dublin then, like, the dominance to which you alluded in the 6 in a row, I suppose, was a concern to people from outside of Dublin for several years, for several reasons, right? Are you going to... Financial doping, is that the two words that are going to come to mind? I have to be careful what I say, I suppose. I'm surrounded by... well, Rory's a Dub anyway, are you?
I'm a Dub, yeah.
No, I mean, like, for all of the natural advantages, for all of the unnatural advantages, for the simple fact that actually sustained period of dominance by any team in any sport makes it boring to a lot of people. But, like, I was never... a believer that Dublin were going to go on and win 9, 10, 11 in a row, because it doesn't really happen in sport too often, even in situations where a team has a financial advantage over its rivals. Like, do you remember when Dundalk qualified for the Europa League the first time? The fear in League of Ireland football was that they were going to become a Rosenborg, and they didn't, and Rosenborg are no longer even really a Rosenborg. Like, dynasties and all of these kinds of things, absolute excellence will eventually give way to dysfunction, incompetence. I'm not saying that Dublin are dysfunctional or incompetent, but they probably are compared to what they have been. And I felt as though like a decline was always inevitable. I don't know. The interesting thing for me about Dublin and their supposed decline, and Conor Murray makes the same point, is that we don't know how long it's going to last for. We don't know if there will be a bounce back even potentially in this championship, or if it'll take a year before you can kind of establish leaders and new players that apparently aren't coming through. But we've seen that change so quickly so many times. They're an interesting story for sure, like, you know, for the first time to me in a long time.
Joe Brody's put the I wouldn't say studs in, but he's been pretty clear. The game was dead after that. This is after Kerry were 114 to 4 points, cleared the break. Dublin were a shapeless mess, kicking in hopeful long balls, playing as individuals, and worst of all, playing with that discipline. It was a world away from Jim Gavin's perfectionist regime. The worst was that Dublin showed no fight. They ran about hand passing and dropping balls and aimlessly solo running, but none of this amounted to much. Just as they had last week against Armagh, they looked like schmucks. And in another part of his article, looking like a new team at the Ireland's Got Talent auditions. So that's Joe Brody's summary.
I mean, the first thing I wanted to do is put a camera on Joe Brolly for just, you know, a player cam on Joe Brolly for a week and just follow his conversations that he has with people, because I mean, we get the highlights in the Sunday Inno every week, but like, you know, he was at Ronnie Faye's funeral and chatting to the people who were at the funeral, including, you know, characters like Red Mickey and where's Paddy McDonnell, and they want to throw Desi Farrell in the canal. Was basically Paddy Blue Eyes McDonnell didn't want his name to be in the Sunday Indo, but he ends up in there anyway. So he's good value as always, but the knives are going to be sharpening for Desi Farrell soon enough. You know, the Dublin football kind of had it so good for so long that it's not going to tolerate these levels of mediocrity for too long. But I mean, it does feel like they've come back to the pack, and I think everyone who, you know, had the kind of misfortune of trying to defend Dublin during the kind of the 5-6 in a row, who all said that it would end at some stage, is now kind of able to say a little bit of "I told you so." That when Cluxton went, that two of the kind of generational talents stepped away in their mid-20s in their prime. That when the greats of the 2011 team all started to disappear. And then with the kind of, I mean, there have been a couple of under-20s wins, but they don't seem to have been as star-laden as the previous generation. So the talent, there's obviously players there. There's always going to be players, a bit like English rugby. There's always going to be players in Dublin, but they're not, you know, the Dublin got two generational teams almost at once and have created the greatest team under the greatest manager of all time. And there was always going to be a bit of leanness after that. But leanness for Dublin usually means staying in the top 8 and just not winning the All-Ireland for a couple of years. Now, I once, amongst my friends, famously sat in a pub the night the Tyrone came down with their beards and beat Dublin out the gate in 2008, proclaimed that Dublin would never win another All-Ireland in my lifetime. So I'm not great at making predictions because they went and dominated the next decade, but I do think that there's going to be a year or two of a rebuild, and it's a real challenge for the generation of Fenton, Kilkenny, Scully, for Conor O'Callaghan, for these players who don't have the support cast anymore, to build something new. And I think if they do manage to get back from this point to win in Ireland in the next 2 or 3 years, that it will be as sweeter or as sweet as the 5 in a row was to them, because they're at a low ebb now and they've kind of lost. They're playing on memory, and a lot of what they're doing is fairly directionless. And Desi Farrell is casting around for new players and not really finding them. So it's going to be the fascinating story of the league, certainly into the championship. And if I was from Kerry, if I was from Armagh, if I was from Tyrone, obviously Mayo, like, you know, now you can start eyeing up All Irelands because the big dog is gone.
Yeah, the quotes from Desi Farrell at the back of the Sunday World. Look, everyone has an opinion. There'll be those who want to twist the knife, of course, and that's just part and parcel of Dublin's legacy. We ignore that, to be honest. You have to focus on the work in hand, and there's plenty of that to be doing, don't get me wrong, but it's just about the internal focus and keeping things on track and keeping the head down and get back to the practice ground and work on the areas we need to. Colin O'Rourke kind of almost suggesting that Desi Farrell doesn't seem to have as strong a grip on the dressing room as Jim Gavin has. Look, with all these things, with all the retirements they had, Gavin, you know, Feely McMahon, Paddy Andrews, Kevin McManaman, Michael Darmacaulay. I'm just going through them now, like Paul Mannion, Jack McCaffrey not available, Stephen Cluxton we know is retired, even though there hasn't been an announcement of it. Obviously, when that happens, you're going to have turbulence afterwards. But I just do feel that it's not as tight as it was under Jim Gavin. And the reason why I believe that is because I don't feel that Dublin are on a journey now. A lot of those players are sated. As much as they will try and as much as they will be up at 6 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day to try and win the All-Ireland, if you've done it, if you've done everything in the game, it's hard to be at the start of a journey instantly. Offaly's journey ended in 1982. They've been on the journey for 5 to 6 years under Eugene McGee. Kerry in 86 took them another 11 years to win All-Ireland. It is now going to be 7 years since Kilkenny won an All-Ireland hurling title after Henry Shefflin retired. Owen Larkin, JJ Delaney, Tommy Walsh, Eddie Brennan, all those players. And look, sport is cyclical, but Dublin don't seem to me to be on a hungry journey as they were under Pat Gilroy, as they were under Heffo in the early 70s, and as they were under Jim Gavin.
I think you're spot on. I think almost by definition, being on a journey dictates that you are travelling in a direction, and if you're not on a journey, you're probably just either standing still or sailing round in circles. And even like looking at how Dublin are playing, they feel a little bit rudderless or a little bit directionless. Like, I've never seen Kieran Kilkenny look so unsure of himself in possession. Not necessarily that he was losing the ball, but just that he didn't know where to go with it and who to give it to. I think what you say about like all of the players who have departed, that's bound to leave a vacuum, right? People speak about culture in a sports setup, in a dressing room, and really until it exists, I think it's a bit of a buzzword and a nonsensical term. But when it actually exists, and when you have guys who have that drive it within a dressing room, guys who stitch the whole thing together, not only in terms of how a team plays, but socially within the group, it's something to hang on to. And when those guys leave that setup, it almost as though, like, to use your analogy about a journey, John, like, it feels as though they need to plot a new course altogether if they're going to do something. I wonder, do you need a little bit more of a third wave of players in order for that to materialise? Because a lot of the guys who are still on the panel have already been on that journey. And from what we're reading today, and I suppose despite some of that 20 success, it doesn't feel as though they have the guys yet who can step up and fill that void left by the leaders who have departed. But also, I would say to any Dublin fan listening, these things aren't seamless either. And for a young guy coming up, like some of the guys who are going to be taking up the mantle now as leaders, as drivers potentially of a culture, it's going to take time for them to find their feet, find their voice properly. And for that, for several leaders to actually learn how to synchronise a little bit and work together. You know, you look at Ireland in the rugby yesterday, like at times Johnny Sexton is wondering whether he goes to the corner or points to the post. He has a chat with James Ryan. Like, James Ryan, it's taken James Ryan a while to get to that level where he would have the respect of a Johnny Sexton in order to have that conversation. When Peter Manny comes on, it's the same thing. Those relationships need to form as well, and it might just take another season before that's even realistic.
It's like when Ireland reached the end of the World Cup in 19, you didn't feel they were on a journey anymore, Rory. And you feel with Andy Farrell now, they are on a journey.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like, I mean, these players, you're right. They've, you know, Brian Fenton didn't lose a game for most of his inter-county career. I mean, how do you keep getting up for games over and over again when you've done everything? You know, how do you manage to motivate yourself when everyone's coming for you all the time, and you've made the history, and then you've made even more history a year later, and you've conquered all the mountains. So now the challenge is, and I guess this is the team that Dessie Farrell has to instill in the players now, is to go and say, right, let's build another legacy. That you're getting beaten around the place. It's about pride now. It's about your reputation. You know, people are coming for you. Armagh came for you. Kerry are coming for you. Kerry are leaving disappointed that they didn't put you to the sword even more. But there's a line in Shane McGrath's piece about the game, about John Small and Davy Byrne kind of getting involved in a bit of pulling and dragging. And it just reminded me of the All-Ireland semi-final last year, and that just like terrible collapse that happened in that game from a mental point of view from Dublin, and the loss of discipline that just was a sign of how far standards have slipped since the heights of the Jim Gavin era. And this team doesn't seem to be able to reach the same. I mean, maybe it's just because they can't. They did it for so long. For amateur sportsmen to reach the levels of excellence that they got to, and the more we hear about that culture from, say, Paddy Andrews on your station, or from Philly McMahon in his columns with us, we're starting to see little bits and pieces more of what it took out of the players, what it demanded of them. Like, can you do that as an amateur sportsman for so long? Like, players are stepping away mid-career because it's just asking too much of them. And standards are starting to slip, which is almost inevitable. So maybe it's just it's on the younger guys to come through and to create. They're fresh, they're new, they want to create their own history with Dublin. Maybe he needs to start moving some of the bigger players on. Maybe a new manager has to come in and do that, because, like, how do you drop Brian Fenton if he's won 6 All-Irelands? I'm not calling for Brian Fenton to be dropped by any manner of means, but, like, players like that who have all the medals, like, they're so powerful. They've achieved so much more than anyone on the management team even. So there's a real power dynamic there as well at play that's just really, really fascinating. It's why this story will run and run as through the league, and they're always going to be the ones who sell papers. They're the capital city team. Everyone who doesn't love them hates them, and it's going to be like no one's going to have any sympathy for them either. These are guys. If they retire tomorrow, no matter what happens the next couple of weeks, their legacy's already cemented.
Okay, got to take a break. Rory O'Connor and Gavin Casey on the Sunday pay-per-view. We're back with Off the Ball after this. Wayne Rooney, very interesting, as I said at the very start of the pay-per-view, just giving some details about his documentary that's coming up on Amazon Prime, which is called Rooney next week, and the Sunday papers have got a bit of a serialisation of that, don't they, Gavin?
Yeah, it seems like a few of them had a chat with him, maybe a pooled interview of some sort. People they'll have heard you if they were listening at the top of the show, speaking about how Rooney has come out and admitted that at a time in his life, particularly earlier in his Manchester United playing career, that he had an issue with drink, or at least that he used alcohol as a means of dealing with his other issues. And he's quite he's searingly honest in this piece, and I hope that the documentary, I'm sure it will actually match up to that. Just to give you kind of an idea of what he was saying, really, I locked myself away. There were times where you'd get a couple of days off from football, and I would actually lock myself away and just drink to take all of that away from my mind. And all of that he's talking about are the pressures of playing for Manchester United, the pressures even of dealing with Sir Alex Ferguson. It'll be very interesting to see if more about their relationship comes out in the documentary, and the pressures of captaining England. What fascinates me a little bit about this interview or this serialized interview is, like, he constantly takes responsibility for some of the things that have gone wrong in his career off the field. And even in the trailer for the documentary, his wife Colleen is interviewed about some of his, say, misdemeanors and the pressures that he put on their relationship at a younger age. She apparently in the documentary explains why she forgave him as well. But, like, he says, I've always had an image that I knew wasn't me, but I have put myself in that position with the things that I've done. And later on he says that sort of famous anger that we attribute to his being a great footballer, it was almost a kind of a chicken and egg scenario. I always just presumed he played angry because he was a kid from Liverpool, like, quote unquote street footballer who had that hunger to make it. But he makes the point that a lot of the anger that we saw of him on the pitch as a professional was as a result of the coverage he was getting, which was a result of his own behaviour. And he says a lot of the anger was because I did things that enabled people to say things and write things about me that wasn't really me, but were isolated incidents. He says that over the past 15 years, I haven't had many nights out. I might have had 10 nights out, but 4 or 5 of them have given people big exclusives. And again, it's not like he's trying to blame the media per se. He says when something happened, it always involved drink. It was never when I was sober. That's what I had to figure out. Yeah.
It's hard, Rory, when you're 16 and you're catapulted from a working class area of Liverpool, where it was maybe, I wouldn't say a loving upbringing, obviously, but to mega stardom at 16, you're scoring for Everton, and then you're like Euro 2004. He talks about how well he did at the tournament there, 18 years of age. It must have been a huge culture shock to him, and to cope with that, it's not easy. And he's kind of recanted that, and even been honest about wearing longer studs against Chelsea in 2006, which was obviously wrong. He's a thoughtful guy. He seems to have calmed his issues. He could be a manager of the future, Wayne Rooney. And once again, as I say, it's the bubble. You're put into this bubble, and you've all these expectations, and you've got the tabloid press and the red tops in the UK, and they're going to have a go at you. I remember seeing Wayne Rooney play in 2003 for Everton at Tottenham, and it wasn't me, obviously, because I'm a saint, but we were giving him a lot of stick when he came on about his appearance and all that kind of thing. So he's had an interesting 20 years.
Yeah, and I maybe it's just my age. I'm 3 years older than him, so I feel like he's been around. Like, it doesn't feel like that long ago he was that kid scoring on his debut, and then like we've lived his career. You know, he's a superstar of a kind of the modern age, and we know an awful lot about him. And I always got the impression from the English journalists who dealt with him that he's very popular. Like he was always, I always got the impression he's quite a sound fella away from it. That he had time for people, and he was always very engaging across it. And then he would make mistakes, and you read stories, and they never painted him in a particularly good light. But he's kind of owning up to them across this. And like, if the purpose of these interviews was to encourage people to watch the documentary, they've worked a treat, because like I really want to see this now, and I wasn't aware it was coming out. But yeah, they've been this tired time old story of a young, talented man or woman in say a sport like tennis or something like that, being projected into the worldwide fame overnight because of what they're able to do with their feet or their hands on the sporting arena. It's like there's a sadness to it. There's a, you know, like how exposed that he felt, and there's a story towards the end of the piece I'm reading in the Sunday Times where there was a paparazzi piece a picture of himself and his parents coming out of the sea in Cancun in 2003, and like it's just 3 people on the beach, you know, and like the 2 parents are big, and they were absolutely mocked across the nation. And it was like around the time of, like, you know, the kind of chav culture was being mocked across, you know, the British media, and like these people who were famous only because their son became a really, really good footballer were suddenly being slagged off on the Jonathan Ross show. And Rooney says he hasn't seen him since, but still to this day, if I saw Jonathan Ross, I'd speak to him and ask him why he did that. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't have spoken to him. I'd have hit him. So maybe, yeah, he's got a lot of his issues under control, but like the unfairness of that, to just, like, you know, to be afraid of taking your top off on a beach because you might appear in the paper because your son is famous, like that's something that none of us have to ever go through, thankfully. And it's pretty harrowing, really, even though, like, you know, you can trade off the fact that he made loads of money out of it and all of that stuff as well, that he's still, you know, he's not probably making money out of this documentary and stuff as well, but he's earning it because he's being honest, and he's kind of, you know, he's giving of himself, which I think when people now watch Derby and they see someone being kind of upfront with them, I think people will get on board with him as a manager and want them to succeed. And that's, I guess that's the essence of good PR. But seems to be a bit of a genuineness to Rooney that shines through.
Roy Keane.
Here we go again.
Tommy Conlon talking about, like, for better or worse, Roy Keane is likely to bring his star quality from Easy Street back to the coalface at Sunderland. Just a kid with a crazy dream. I love this this paragraph here. The legendary film director Orson Welles discussed the mystery of camera charisma with Michael Parkinson on the BBC in 1974. For example, said Wells, he once visited a movie set that had Gary Cooper in the lead role. Cooper would do a take and it wouldn't look anything special in the flesh, but somehow mediated through the camera. He was luminous, magic, you know. Shrugged, still mystified Wells. There isn't any rule at all that explains it. Maybe Keane can't explain it either. His box office ability to charm the cameras, and then goes on to talk about Sunderland. And, you know, he's waited for 11 years and for some reason has never let go of that ambition, in which case it has to be a deeper calling than mere ambition. It has to be a want of some sort. But if Roy Keane was advising Roy Keane about it, he'd probably say, can you not take a hint? If no one is asking you for a dance after 11 years, you might as well go home, son.
Yeah, it's become a national sport, isn't it? Like, hasn't it? I suppose, trying to get to the bottom of Roy Keane and trying to figure out what makes him tick, and maybe trying to figure out why we find him so interesting or so compelling all of the time, aside from the version of him that we see in a Sky Sports punditry or wherever he's doing it. And I think with this Sunderland move, as soon as I heard about it, I was naturally excited, just thinking of the story, it being something new but also something old, you know, at a time when we could probably do a little bit more of that old. And I think it's a perfect opportunity for him. I know people might say, look, it's League One. Sunderland are pretty well positioned in League One. He would have to do a very, very bad job, one would imagine, to take them out of playoff contention at least. And if he can galvanise a squad who are probably playing at a level of football which is still a very high level, but one in which they would still look up to him or revere him, then why not? Oh, another promotion on your CV, and suddenly maybe you are back in the mix for other jobs if you want them. Or maybe as he said to Gary Neville in that famous interview they did on Neville's YouTube channel, the overlap, like, he felt as though he left Sunderland prematurely. Actually, when the going got tough a little bit, he walked out, and he realised in retrospect he actually should have hung in there. And maybe this time around, he that's one mistake he may have learned from, and he could give it a few years. I don't know.
He'll have to curb his personality, because I think it's once again put into the columns, and David Walsh has been quite positive. I think he met Roy Keane before Christmas. I hope he gets the job, partly because I believe there's a good manager in there eager to get out. Of course, his intelligence and passion come out. The caveat, he may not always respond to challenging moments in the way that the official football world deems appropriate. Rory, I suppose, look, there's obviously unfinished business in his mind about football management as being the number one, because we know he's number two to Martin O'Neill at Ireland, and obviously then had jobs at Villa and Forest. But what's the end game here? You know, if you get back into it, you're successfully bringing him to the Championship. Is it a stepping stone back into the Republic of Ireland job at some stage? What is the end game? I suppose that's what I'm asking myself about it, because at the age of 50, Ferguson was beginning to turn United into a dominant force in not only English but European football. And Clough, by the age of 50, his other manager, he had already won 2 European Cups.
I think the end game is peace of mind, or an attempt to try and, you know, sate that desire that he has. And like, who am I to second guess what's gone on Roy Keane's brain? I mean, far more qualified people have tried and failed to do that, but there seems, you know, he still talks consistently about wanting to get back in it and do one last job. So maybe this will either convince him that management is for him, and he'll spend the next 15 years trying to achieve whatever it is, whatever level he wants to achieve it. Because I don't think he has any particular errors and graces about what level. Like, obviously he wants to be as good as he can be, but I mean, Roy Keane seems to love going to football matches no matter what level it is, whether it's Cork City, Cove, or when he's on his trips back home, or whether he's going to see Wigan on a Wednesday night in whatever league they're in. And you know, like, it doesn't seem, I don't think he's a snobbish approach to things. I think you quite like the cut and thrust of League One or Championship football, because you're playing twice a week. It's more about motivation than it is tactical preparation. I think, like, I can't see Roy Keane ever being an elite top level manager in, you know, when the top level managers are the great thinkers of the game. I mean, England is the hothouse now for, or it's the finishing school for the great managers. You know, you've got Tuchel, Klopp, you've got Guardiola, obviously, and they are. And then you've next level coaches who are kind of coming in at the, you know, your Brightons, your Brentfords, and there, you know, there's innovation going on all over the place. And even when his punditry, as entertaining as it is, you don't get a great sense that he's a great thinker of the game. That he obviously understands the game.
He just brings something different, though. He brings the lines.
He's a motivator.
He brings the lines.
Yeah, it's more that kind of force of personality and motivation. And he obviously understands the game because he was a great player, but it doesn't necessarily translate. And at the top end of the sport, you need to be able to prize open. You know, you need to have a game plan, and you need to be tactically brilliant as well. You need to bring everything to the table. But at the level that he's going in, I think he could enjoy it for a while. He could get a great buzz out of being on the sideline, about being in the stadiums, you know, being an active participant in the sport. Because at the moment, he's part of the chattering class. You know, he's a very well played part of the chattering class, but he's not getting his boots on. He's not getting down and dirty with it. And I think that's what he'd like to do, and get that glory from the crowd, that endorphin hit that you get from winning football matches and getting promotions and stuff. And eventually he'll probably lose patience with players and get sick of modern young people and eventually fall out with people. And the one thing that's ringing in my head a little bit is the Stephen Ward WhatsApp voice note, and you know, the kind of how toxic things can get when things turn sour underneath them.
Yeah, well, maybe
that'll be a hit for a while, you know.
That's what he needs to learn, obviously, that you know, if this is a completely new slate, that he'll have to, like Gerrard, have to have the coach in there, the old hand, like a Gary McAllister type, the scouting network. And for me, that's what that's about. Like, if you were looking at English managers who are incredible players, you'd have to think Gerrard is way ahead of Keane at the moment, managing in England. And Gerrard, to me, at the moment, is on that path to potentially being a top manager. But I always don't really get either the kind of feeling that punditry is a level below. Like, look at John Madden, what he did in American football, the recently deceased legend of American football. What's wrong with being the voice of the game?
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I wouldn't necessarily think that Keane's punditry style lends itself to becoming the voice of the game, at least in an analytical sense, like, because he doesn't really actually analyse, but he's certainly a born entertainer. And actually in Tommy Collins' piece, it was just after the paragraph you read out about Orson Welles. I love this from Tommy. He said maybe Keane can't explain it either, and he's talking about that entertaining quality that he has. Maybe he doesn't even know he has it. Maybe it comes so naturally to him he doesn't even put value on it because it requires so little effort. In other words, it's the exact opposite of what he required from himself when he was a midfield emperor of English football. I think that is a really nice way of summing up maybe the fact that we find Keane so entertaining, and it seems to come so conveniently to him, and yet it's not enough for him.
You're from Cork, what is it?
Well, I only find him entertaining in a very conventional sense, like everybody else. You know, the quips, the one-liners, the occasional outburst.
But is he absolutely, utterly revered down there? Is it hero worship?
It is now, yeah. And
it's always been that way.
I wouldn't say so. I'd say the majority of people from Cork, or the majority of sports fans from Cork, have always had a growl for him for sure, and there's a pride in Cork people that he went on to do what he did. I actually think to some degree, and this will sound wild, but I think Keane's personality has shaped Cork's sense of self a little bit in the last 20-25 years, and our supposed arrogance. I mean, I don't really sense it myself, but in all seriousness, like what I found over the, like, bear in mind, let's not go down the Saipan route or have a discussion about it necessarily, but it did happen, and at that time it wasn't as though Cork rose up in arms in favour of Roy Keane. There were a lot of people who felt left down. I remember even walking out, I was in primary school, third class, walking out, every parent in the car park of our primary school was talking about it, and most of them were actually livid with Roy Keane, you know. And I think it took a while before a lot of people sort of rediscovered that pride in him. But now, you asked me, like, you know, what's so interesting about him as a Cork man. I suppose I don't find him like that interesting because maybe I'm exposed to him more, I don't know. What I find is that in Cork, what won people back and what increased his stock in the people who always stuck with him was the fact that, like, he does things constantly behind the scenes, charitable things, good turns for people that never make it onto these pages or shows like this, or maybe never even really make it into public consciousness. Like, there was a time recently, it was in the paper as it turned out, but he didn't ask for it to be, where he was working with St Angela's secondary school students, a girls' school in Cork, making sandwiches for Cork Penny Dinners, which is a homeless charity, and he just shows up there the odd time and helps out, you know. And I think people in Cork are acutely aware of that side of Keane that maybe the rest of the world is only learning about with the advent of social media and him being out there a little bit more.
And he wouldn't want that publicised. That's the whole thing.
No, he hates it, yeah. Which is interesting, you know, because I don't think he's necessarily trying to create some sort of bad boy or tough guy personality. I think he created that on the pitch anyway, right? And it will outlast him in a way. But I often wonder, I suppose, why he doesn't want people to see his softer side, because I actually think it would have lended him to getting back into management a little bit more quickly. Maybe
he's just like a private person, and maybe he doesn't feel that those things should be highlighted. I just, there's always to me been a strain of Roy Keane about drive and standards, and that goes back to when it didn't necessarily work out for him as a young Irish underage international when he was 15 years of age, and eventually then becomes probably the most important player we've ever had. You know, so just let you know, it's 2-8 to Armagh, 3 points to Tyrone in the Allianz Football League, which kind of brings me on to, just to finish off the articles here on the Sunday Paper Review. Roy curses about Rian O'Neill. Even in the depths of winter, their ransacking of Croke Park, their disemboweling of old Dublin certainties carried the swagger of a coming summer force. The sequence of mesmerising moments which O'Neill broke Desi Farrell's side were so jaw-droppingly eloquent that they can only be judged to the ultimate standard. Yes, this was a masterclass that any of the game's eternal artists, Maurice Fitzgerald, Peter Canavan or Kieran MacDonald, or indeed O'Neill's uncle Oisin McConville, will have been thrilled to attach to their CV. One of the kind of heartening things I felt, Rory, today was Kieran McGinney, I think, has been in that job about 8 years. So maybe it's becoming finally for Armagh this year. But it's also just to show that actually sticking with somebody on a plan is something that's quite refreshing in the world of chopping managers. Yeah, absolutely, because it goes against the grain, really, doesn't it? It's you get one of your greatest players in, you give him time, and you basically say to him, you see some levels of progress. There's been years where he's gone forward. There's been years where they've gone back to a little bit, but they've just invested that time in him, and they've given him the time the time and the patience to
rebuild what was once the great force of that era where Roy Keane was kind of entering into management. Like it's a while ago now, but they still, like, that jersey still strikes fear into people, to people from other counties who were around in that era, and it looks like they're backing it up today. It's obviously, it's his only league, as they say, and like, it's very early days, and Mark O'Shea is writing about it in the Mail as well, and he's saying, there's shades of that team. He's seeing elements of McGeeney's team in the team that he's built now, but he says, like, it's not that long ago that Monaghan were cutting a thrust through them, so it's too early to get carried away. But look, the more excellent football teams there are in Gaelic football, the better. Like, it's a simple thing to say, but it's for too long it's been 3 or 4 teams, and we've waited until the end of summer to kind of get a couple of good games. The league is always much better than the championship, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing the emergence of strong teams. Like, again, it's part of the same story. Dublin coming back to the pack. Surely your Kildares, your Meads should be licking their lips and now going, we can take these guys off as well. Like, so suddenly there's an incentive there for all these teams who are improving to take another step along the way, and Armagh look like they're at the vanguard of that. And hopefully it's an encouragement to other counties to say, and maybe it's a lesson to Dublin to kind of have a bit more patience with Dessie Farrell as well, that these things do take time, and building a team is maybe not something you can do over the course of a winter. Maybe you need a couple of winters, and maybe you need to kind of have a lot of influence across the county before you can do that. It's a good example, and it's working well for them.
Lovely. Just before we got to go, but Porrickmar, some great stuff about Porrickmar from Eamon Sweeney, the back of the Sunday Independent, and also Dennis Walshworth reading, folks. Today later on, Tipperary played 60 championship matches in the 13 seasons 2009 to 2021. Porrickmar started each and every one and finished all bar 5. So just incredible stuff from Porrickmar. Retired earlier in the week on a medical advice. 3 All-Ireland titles, 6 All-Stars. Inspiration for a Tip generation. Mar was a strong man rather than a hard man. The latter phrase carries connotations of skullduggery, which don't really fit with his career, which I think was an important point for anybody to make this week about Paddy Mar. And Tipperary got a bit of rebuilding to do.
Yeah, he seems to. I always got the impression with Mar, he sort of encapsulates what Tipperary fans were looking for from a hurler. He kind of reminded me of the Rock for Cork, in the sense that
he rises the players around him and the crowd. It's the catching the ball, it's the clearances, it's the
psychological impact he has on everybody in the ground.
He's back to an almost like a Doyle, or he's a traditional Tipperary hurler, is what he was, wasn't he?
Yeah, and it's a challenge for them to. Again, we speak about like some of the leaders that Dublin have lost. Like, he is a massive loss.
And just to finish, you have an article you want to point people to about boxing.
Yeah, just
very briefly.
It's about it's in the Sun, page 32 and 33. Kevin Byrne, who's a good friend of mine, wrote a lovely piece with Niall Kennedy, an Irish heavyweight who will probably never make the headlines that we're sort of talking about. Ireland, Leona Maguire, Porrickmar, but is just a phenomenal sports person, phenomenal guy. He credits Keith Earls for coming out and speaking about his bipolar, and he's doing the same. Read the piece, it's brilliant, and it's also in a podcast form as well, The Rocky Road.
Gavin Casey, thank you.
Thank you, John, pleasure.
Rory O'Connor, thanks so much.
Thanks, lads.